while people were under the influence of it?
We did what's called MR spectroscopy in a couple of people under the influence of DMT. We were looking at the occipital cortex, which is the visual part of the brain, but we didn't quite see anything. This was in the early 90s, and the technology was not quite up to scratch like it is now in terms of being able to see stuff. So the results were kind of equivocal. We never published them.
Do you think if y'all did it again now with the new equipment, it would work better?
I think it could, and PET scan studies would be even more sensitive. I kind of shied away from PET studies though, because that involved giving people radioactivity injections, and anomalous to get somebody high on DMT and to give them radiation.
Yeah, that would be kind of mean.
I couldn't quite do that, no. Yeah. I think so in terms of the more sophisticated MR technology, that you might be able to see something now.
What obvious physiological effects do people experience when they have DMT? Heart rate, blood pressure, that kind of thing.
Well, let me get back to a couple other of your questions. One of them was in terms of melatonin and DMT. We studied melatonin levels in response to DMT, and they didn't budge. They just stayed rather low, which is the case during the day. I don't think there have been animal studies on DMT and melatonin, but I'm a bit out of the field in terms of the animal pharmacology stuff these days. And in terms of the metabolism of the brain in response to DMT, there have been some SPECT scan studies, kind of like a hybrid, between like a CT scan and a PET study of the responses to ayahuasca in humans, and ayahuasca contains DMT. Those studies came out of Jordi Riba's laboratory in Barcelona, Spain, and I can't remember the exact regions of the brain that lit up or slowed down, but those papers can be tracked down at any medical school library or even online. So to get to your question about physiological responses to DMT, yeah, it was quite stimulating in a lot of ways. It increased heart rate, it increased people's blood pressure, it increased core body temperature, it increased pupil diameter, and all kinds of hormones went up in response to our injections of DMT.
Did oxytocin increase?
What actually increased was vasopressin, which is closely related to oxytocin. Unfortunately, we never published those vasopressin data. But up until that time, that was the most potent stimulus to vasopressin release in humans that had been reported up to date. Concentrations of endorphin went up, growth hormone, prolactin, cortisol, growth hormone, all kinds of things. So all systems were go pretty much with the injection of DMT.
So knowing that, do you think DMT could have long-term beneficial effects for people or long-term adverse effects? What do you think long-term if somebody used it regularly?
Oh, whenever you think about these kinds of questions, you always kind of return to the questions of set and setting. I'm like, who's taking the drug, for what reason, and in what kind of circumstances. Some of these ayahuasqueros in South America, they've been drinking ayahuasca 3 times a week for 50 years, and they're fine. They're healthy. They're leaders in the community.
They're probably very spiritually aware too.
They're spiritually oriented. If they had mental problems or substance abuse kinds of problems beforehand, oftentimes those went away. On the other hand, I get emails, either from kids or from their parents, describing these psychotic breaks, that the kids experienced as a result of smoking DMT. So they weren't that stable perhaps in the first place. There may have been some psychotic individual history on their part, or family history of psychosis somewhere. There may have been smoking DMT in very stressful circumstances. They may have been, combining the DMT, with other drugs. So it's,
like ecstasy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So you have to be really careful. Like I was saying early on, I don't encourage anybody, to take drugs to tamper, with their brain chemistry in any way. Still though people do. And if you're going to, you have to really be careful. Know your source and, know your intent, know your own biology, make certain, that you're, taking, these things in, the most supportive, possible environment, all those kinds of, common sense kinds of things.
Yeah, DMT is definitely not a party drug. It's not anything like LSD or anything like that. So I recommend to anybody listening, if you do decide to go down that route, you need to do it from a spiritual perspective and not anything else.
Well, spiritual, like how do you define spiritual? Because that's, kind of a question I'm grappling with a lot these days as well.
How I define it is seeking enlightenment, seeking to gain something out of the experience, a better understanding of who we are after we go. That's one thing that really piqued my interest about it was the near-death experiences that people describe, and then the DMT experiences people describe seem to be pretty much in sync. Would you agree with that?
I, think that they share features in common anyway, the near-death experience and, the DMT experience. Or the enlightenment experience and the DMT experience, they share certain features. But I'm not sure how closely aligned they are, strictly speaking. Just in terms of the reports of my volunteers and the kinds of reports that I hear, my correspondence, by email. The enlightenment experience, kind of classically described within Buddhism, is, I think, more commonly described by, people that use, 5-methoxy-DMT as opposed to DMT. The DMT experience is a lot more relational. Like you're in a space and, you're relating to the, contents of the DMT environment. It isn't like you're, kind of merging into the, the void or into the white light. That seems a bit more common in response to 5-methoxy-DMT. But getting back to the question about the intent and the set and the setting and is DMT a party drug or not? Anybody can abuse any drug anytime. So people can abuse DMT. They can use it as a party drug. But I think you're asking, for trouble though, because it is, so destabilizing and so shocking. If you do take it, it's, best advised to take it in a non-stimulating, supportive, therapeutic or spiritual or, kind of, contained environment, as best as you can.
And when you talk about destabilizing and shocking, are you talking about maybe the process of ego loss that some people experience when they're on DMT?
Well, I don't think it's ego loss. It's, just kind of your ego being swept aside or being kind of stomped on or being swatted like a fly. Your ego, is just kind of overwhelmed by the enormity of the experience. It's kind of beyond what, most people are accustomed to, kind of dealing with in their everyday lives. There's an expression called, the fear of God. It's not quite exactly just, being afraid. It's, I'm like being completely overwhelmed and in awe and in reverence at the same time. It's, a complex combination of feelings. But, the common theme, though, is just being overwhelmed, by the enormity of, the emotions and the perceptions and, the bodily effects, those kinds of things.
Do you think that could help people that have, say, anxiety disorders or they have depression or something like that, not psychosis, but just affective disorders, to use DMT and help figure out how to make themselves better? Do you think that there's some benefit in that?
Well, there could be. Like a couple of my volunteers, as a result of the IV DMT,